if you see this recorded, Jonathan F. Mills, that's me everywhere. So Twitter, LinkedIn, Gmail, like hit me wherever you want to hit me at Jonathan F. Mills if you've got questions, and we'll we can chat through. All right. So from what I have seen so far, nobody has experience with DataFactory, which means usually one thing. So my first goal always, whenever I'm given a talk, is I want at least one person who's used this technology before in the talk, because then when my demo breaks, like I've got somebody to go to. So if you're that person, now I've said it out loud, nobody's gonna raise their hand because nobody wants to get picked on, but that's fine. We're just gonna kind of go, we're gonna see how things go, and work our way through. So once I start slides, like I won't be able to see the chat anymore until my slides go away. So yeah, that's just the way it's gonna be. So I'm gonna kick off, and if you have questions, I'll see the chat when I leave slides. All right. So the idea of this talk is wrangling data. So using Azure DataFactory to keep your data in line. And this is kind of the thing. And so the company I work for, Worldwide Technology, we come across a lot of this same kind of idea where companies have a lot of data kind of spread all over the place, and they want to do something with it, right? And so I have this cool little image in this talk of wrangling data being like cows and cowboys, and you're gonna collect the cows into one pasture, and it's easy, right? Except that when you get to like the enterprise scale and you start talking to companies that do big things, it feels more like herding cats than herding cows, right? Because everything's everywhere, and they're all on their own upgrade cycles, and things change all over the place, and they don't care about each other. See, cows are herd animals. Cats are not herd animals. And so your disparate data systems aren't herd animals. They're their own individual thing that want their own individual stuff. And so trying to pull all this data together can be very horrible, actually, just to be brutally honest. So we attract a clientele that makes great, smart thoughts about data. And so they come to us and they say things like, we need to make smart data-driven decisions. I want to understand when I should do something or the right thing to do based upon the data that I have. And that's great. And those are the types of clients we want, because they think about what they want to do. And then we pose a question. Where's your data? Like, okay, you want to make smart data decisions. Where's your data? And chances are, if their data's in one place or even two places, they're not calling us, right? Because they can go do that themselves. Usually the answer to this question is a little complicated, right? So we start with maybe an on-premises accounting system. Okay, that's awesome. And an on-prem inventory. Great. Okay, we got two systems. We can tie those two systems together. They're probably both SQL Server or Oracle or something. Easy. Oh, we're using a SaaS CRM system that we want to tie into. That's its own thing that like sits out, think Salesforce or just something like that. It's its own thing out there in the cloud. Yeah. Oh, we also have a SaaS human resources system that has all of our sales reps in it and all of that stuff. So we're going to need to pull that data in as well in order to figure out how all this stuff goes. But we also have an on-prem time management system. So as we're doing a lot of things around knowing whether or not our efficiency is there for our clerks, well, that's an on-prem system. And so what we really want to do is pull all these systems together that are all different. Like some of them are JSON based REST services, and some of them are databases, and some of them are flat files, or maybe an AS400, like, AS400 files in there. Let's do that too. But what we want to do is build something meaningful out of all of the pieces of data that we have sitting around. And so there's 3 steps to making data usable. And these 3 steps have been around forever. And actually, when I say these 3 steps out loud, some of you are going to, like, you know, do the face palm thing and be like, obviously we know this because you do, but I want to kind of walk through this process. So in order to get your data to the point where you can do something meaningful with it, there's 3 steps. First step, you need to pull the data out of the source. So we had data all over the place, and it's very difficult to join data, JSON-based data in a SaaS system, to SQL-based data on an on-prem SQL server. You can't join across that data until the data is all in one place. So the first thing is, let's pull the data out of these source systems. Excellent. Let's do that. Then let's adjust that data. Let's do some data transformation, some basic calculations on that data in place where we pulled it from. And then you can all probably say this with me, load it into a central place where you can get meaningful insight out of it. And then you kind of slap a reporting system or something on top of it, and now you're done. It's there, and it's these 3 very simple steps that are not simple at all. Like it's not rocket science, but it's not rocket science either, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So if you are a client of mine, then you may have seen a slide similar to this as we kind of work through, because this happens, you know, regularly. We've got a couple of projects going that kind of work in the same mentality, right? You've got a cloud-based system and a couple of on-prem systems. And the idea is, the first step, the first thing we want to do is load all this data into the cloud, where we can start to do some things to it and make some reasonable assumptions and some reasonable calculations on that data. And the tool for Microsoft Azure, specifically, the tool that we want to use when we start through this process, is a tool called Azure DataFactory. And the premise of Azure DataFactory is exactly this. It's going to handle all 3 steps. It's got to pull data, it's going to transform that data, it's going to drop the data somewhere. It's just going to kind of get us through all of it. And then the last step, and for this first piece, just this extract piece, is we're going to drop it into something called a data lake, into a raw zone of a data lake. And we'll talk about what a data lake is kind of as we go. But just kind of this first step is, let's get the data someplace where we can at least start doing something with it. And so I've built a demo that is not really contrived, but way overblown. Like I'll kind of walk through what the idea here is. But instead of going like this big massive thing, I'm going to give you a very small insight into what this tool can do. And then trust me when I say this will scale beyond. Now, one thing, remind me if I don't do it, to start my debug instance of DataFlow. So DataFlow is a part of DataFactory. The debug instance takes sometimes about 10 minutes to start up, and I can't start it beforehand because it times out too. So one of the first things I'll do is click that button so that we get it going. Because the worst thing that could happen is I go to my second demo and then we have to sit and stare at a screen for 10 minutes while my debug instance spins up. Okay. So everybody's still with me. Okay. Because now I can see the chat again. All right. So here's the idea. You may not know this about me, but I run a conference. So I run the Kansas City Developer Conference here in Kansas City. That's where I am. I've been to Code PaLOUsa many times. Chad does the same thing that I do. We use a piece of software called Sessionize. So Sessionized, you're about a day and a half through this conference. So I assume you guys will all be up on the tooling. But if you, I'm going to show a whole bunch of stuff on the screen. If you double click on the screen share option, not my face, you want to make that small, go to the screen share part. If you double click on it, it makes it big. And then you may be able to see everything. So what Sessionized does is manages your conference for you. Your call for papers, your speakers, your agenda, all of that stuff is managed inside this thing. And so for KCDC, I use this tool to do all of that stuff. And so you'll notice KCDC, we did a dev around the sun, all that stuff is there. But I have this demo event because I'm not going to give you live speaker data. You're welcome. So if I open up my demo event, here's what I have. If I go to my speakers, I have 10 speakers that all have sessions. Now, Sessionized gives me a lot of information about them, what sessions they are, their bio, all of that kind of stuff. But it doesn't give me things like hotel information or all of that other stuff. I've got to do that stuff in a different tool. And so what I end up having is a spreadsheet. I've got a spreadsheet over here that has who they are, and then their phone number, their email addresses, and their hotel needs. So whether they can check in, check out dates, all of that kind of stuff. And so that's data that I don't have. But now I've got data in two separate places, and it doesn't coincide with each other, right? So I've got session information in one place, I've got some of this logistical information in another place, and what I really want to do is pull it together into one database that I can use to manage everything that's going on. So that's kind of the premise of my demo, right? That's going to be, think about it as the same way as I've got, the big massive SaaS application that does all my accounting and financials, and then an on-prem system or a flat file system that does something else. So I'm just kind of giving you a smaller little look. So here's what we've got. What Sessionized does for me is it gives me an API. So if I go to my API right here and I click get code, I have an API endpoint that I can call right here that gives me all that JSON data that I need. So I want to pull this JSON data out of Sessionize. I want to pull the Excel data out of that Excel document and put it in my raw zone in my data lake. And we'll talk about what that is when I get there. And now it's ready to be linked together and calculated. Okay. So let's look at that. This, hopefully you have seen this before. If you have not seen this before, I'm not going to explain it because I don't have time. But this is the Azure Portal. And so for a DataFactory instance, for this demo, I need two things, and only two things, because I'm not going to do the database load at the end because it's redundant to the first thing we're going to do, but we'll talk about it. So I need only two things. I have right here a DataFactory instance, so the Code PaLOUsa DataFactory, and I have Code PaLOUsa storage. So I've got a couple of different things. Code PaLOUsa storage, all it is blob storage. Now there's a check mark when you create a storage account that turns on whether it's a data lake or not. For the purposes of the demo, I didn't check the box, and so nothing says data lake, but ignore that. But our data lake essentially is just blob storage. And so the goal of this demo right now is I'm going to take the data, the JSON data and the Excel data, I'm going to pull them into this blob storage and just drop them there. That's the whole goal. Now, when we go into DataFactory, oh, that's super awesome. Let me refresh. I love it when something I haven't even done yet breaks my demo. That's not a good sign. No, it'll be fine. Okay, so you go into DataFactory. Refreshing always fixes everything. your hit called author and monitor, because DataFactory, this is the shell around the outside of it. DataFactory is actually its own thing that sits inside. And so I'm going to click on author and monitor. It's actually going to take me out of the portal into this thing called ADF. And while I log in, I'm going to slide it over here just in case I get something weird. Don't want like client information popping up or something. And there we go. Okay. So here's my Azure Data Factory instance. It's loading. It's getting ready to go. This is for Code PaLOUsa. One thing, if you start to play around with this, the docs are pretty good. So the doc team at Microsoft is fantastic. I know a bunch of those guys, and they do a good job. But we've got videos, we've got tutorials, all of this stuff is right here on the front page of Azure Data Factory. So if you start to play around right there. Okay, but I'm going to get started. Okay, so the first goal, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the Sessionized data. I just want to show you how easy and simple it is to pull data out of a REST API and get it someplace that we can start doing something with it. Everything in Data Factory comes down to a pipeline. And we're not going to do too much kind of deep dive into Data Factory. I'm just going to kind of show you at a high level how this goes. And so I'm going to create a new pipeline. New pipeline. And this pipeline is going to be called Sessionized load. Okay. We're going to copy some data. That's all we're. This first part, purely data copying. So I'm gonna actually give it a name called copy speakers. And I want to show you how incredibly easy this is. So there will be times as I'm going through this, I'm just gonna warn you, I feel but wait, there's more guy, like I should be selling you ladders or something, because as I go through this, I use this tool every day. And I love it. Like it does a lot. It makes things that would be very, very hard super easy. Okay, so we are pulling from a source. And so we've got a pipeline, we're pulling from a source, and that's the source data set. And that data set doesn't exist yet. So we need to create a new data set. And right here, you get kind of a glimpse of Data Factory's connections. Like it can connect to all kinds of stuff. Notice Amazon Redshift, Amazon S3 buckets, Blob storage, all these different databases. I mean, like it just goes on and on and on forever. You can reach on-prem and do stuff. So I want to do a REST service. We're going to pull from a REST service. I want to give this REST service a name. We're going to call it Sessionize Speakers. And I don't have a linked service yet. Okay. So you kind of go through this progression. We have a data set, which is the Sessionized speakers. That data set belongs to a linked service. And so we just have to wire up a service real quick. We're going to call this Sessionize. The base URL is what? For the speaker list is this. There is no authentication. It does not. You can do header-based authentication. You can do all that kind of stuff. And we're going to test that connection just to make sure I didn't type something wrong. It worked. We're going to create that. Okay. So now I've got a Sessionize. I got a base URL. I'm going to say speakers, because that's the speakers data. And I'm going to go back here. And I'm going to preview that data. And there's my data, just like that. So I had to create a linked service. Once that service is created, you just reuse it everywhere. I had to create an endpoint. So the speaker's endpoint, the data set, and now I have data. Just that easy. If I did authentication, header authentication, pagination, all that stuff, it's built in. Like it'll just do it for you. And then I'm going to save this data into a new data set. And we're going to save it to Data Lake Gen 2. And we're going to save it as JSON. Now, in a production world, so I always do Parquet files because they're much smaller and much easier to from the enterprise level to work with in the tool. They're terrible to work with in a demo environment, so like I don't do that. But production wise, we go Parquet, which is it's an Apache Spark file type. So we're going with JSON. We're going to name this Sessionized Speakers. We're going to link that to just my Azure Data Lake. We are going to, there's my storage account name, is going to be Code PaLOUsa Storage. And we are going to drop it into the raw zone Sessionize. We'll create that. Raw Sessionize speakers.json. Now we'll have the option to import a schema for this data. This data doesn't exist yet, so I'm not going to import a schema. I'm just going to click OK. Oh, no, I didn't click OK. I hovered over it and then didn't click it. Okay. Now, I want to slide Storage Explorer over here. So this is Azure Storage Explorer. Ignore this. This is my Julia Child. I can pull something out of the oven in case something breaks. I'm going to come up here, Code PaLOUsa. Right now in my raw zone, here's my blob containers. So Code PaLOUsa storage, that's what I picked on. In my raw zone, I've got nothing. There's nothing there. Slide this back over here. I'm going to click debug, and we're going to run this. It's going to run. So basically when I click run, it's going to run out to Sessionize. It's going to pull all that data down, and it's going to drop it to the my raw zone in my data lake. And it goes pretty fast when it wants to, or it will go very slow. There it goes. Okay. Yeah. And there it is. So Sessionize speakers.json, just like that. And now I have the JSON data downloaded. Real quick, I'm going to show you one more, and we're going to have all that data pulled together because I got to do both of them in order for you to get the benefits of the second one. So we're going to create real quick. I'm going to kind of do this fast. And this is where, if you guys had been more chatty earlier, we could do it together. If you guys want to like chat and pose questions as we go, do so, because I can see the chat over here on the side. Okay, I'm going to create a new pipeline. We'll kind of talk through this really fast. My pipeline is going to be called survey data. Okay. I'm just going to copy data. But this time I'm going to copy data from blob storage. It's an Excel blob storage. So like now I'm dealing with Excel files, and this is going to be survey. A link service. I don't have the link service yet. Azure blob storage. Enter manually. Oh no, from subscription. Storage account name, Code PaLOUsa storage. Click create. All right. Now, this data, this Excel file is in a thing called file system, demo speakers.xls. That's what it is. So I'm going to pull it from there. It will ask me, hey, what's the sheet name in case I have multiple sheets? It's going to ask me whether the first row is a header. Yep, the first row is a header, timestamp, email address, that's all there. So I can say, yeah, the first row is a header. I can import the schema from the connection. I can click OK. And then as soon as it's done thinking, I can view my data. But it's thinking. And it's all, I don't know if you guys see this, but I see this. My laptop can only handle streaming and data factoring and all of this other stuff like so much. So we're going to give that a second. Okay. So basically that's the point. We're going to pull that in and do some work with it. I'm going to give this a chance to finish while I talk about one thing, and then I'll have to come back over and turn on my debug. It's still going. That's weird. It's fine. No worries. Okay. I didn't start my debug instance. No, because my thing froze up. But it's cool. It's cool. We got it under control. Okay. So right now, I'm pulling from two sources. I'm pulling from my on-prem data, and I'm pulling from my I'm pulling from a service up in the cloud that's readily accessible from the world, and I'm pulling from blob storage in the cloud. Like both of those things are super easy and straightforward. But how do I get to my on-prem data, right? Because that seems a little bit more complicated. Here in this case, I had two systems. I had an accounting system and an inventory system back behind the firewall. And so you don't want to punch a hole in the firewall so the cloud, the ambiguous cloud, can now all of a sudden just reach inside your data center and have access to whatever it wants, right? That's not the right way to do things. And so what DataFactory does is it has this cool thing called an integration runtime. And what the integration runtime does is sits behind the firewall and brokers that connection back to DataFactory. So when it fires up, it calls out to the cloud and opens a connection that says, hey, I'm here. Use me if you need something. And then you send down to the integration runtime your SQL queries or your file system queries or whatever, and it runs it all locally behind the firewall and then sends that data back out. Okay. So the idea, you kind of get a little bit of a hint of what a data lake is in that it's basically just the place that's going to store our data. And I have two zones to the data lake. The raw zone, what you saw, I didn't finish it yet for the other one, but what you saw for the raw zone was I pulled down JSON data from an API and I just stored it as JSON in my file system. And so now it's just sitting there. It's a mirror image of what was up in the Sessionized API. And that is still, oh, there it is. Boom. Okay. So I can preview data. And there's my Excel data, right? So we're back. And one important thing, yeah, sorry, Dylan. My computer kind of melted down. So I'm going to publish everything just to kind of save it. That's publishing is the same thing as saving while you're kind of working through this stuff. And yeah, I can't publish because I need a sync data set. Okay. So if I sync, my sync is going to be, so we're back to finishing the Excel import. if I come back up to copy data, I have my import. Now I'm going to do my sync. Now my sync data set is going to be a new, see, I have my sessionized speakers. That's this cool little icon right there. I'm still going to do data lake, but now I'm going to do delimited text because it's an Excel doc. I can't save it as a Excel. I can save it as delimited text. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to call this survey raw. We're saving it to the data lake. I'm going to save the first row as the header. I'm going to say raw zone. I'm going to say survey. Survey.csv. I'm going to click OK. That's weird. Okay. So now I'm going to run that debug. And then what we should see is right here in my raw zone, I should rapidly have a survey directory now with a CSV that's all my survey data. Okay, so that's the load part. Both of those are done. I'm now going to turn on my DataFlow debug because that's going to be important. I'm going to publish everything because that's my save mechanism. So now I feel like if everything falls apart, I'm in a good place. All right, let's finish the slides. Boom. Okay. So now we want to extract data from our, oh no, we did the extraction. The little freeze thing flushed me for a second. Okay, we did our extraction. We now have data that we can do stuff with it. But now we want to do some level of transformation. I want to run calculations. I want to run merges. I want to do all of the normal stuff that I would do before I go and run reports, right? And so what we want to do is take what's in the raw zone, modify it in a way that cleans it up into a curated data zone. And then we'll leverage that for the next piece. And so that's the part that we're going to talk about now, is kind of doing this. And I'll give you a very specific thing. And I did start the debug instance, but you'll see that it's still loading. Like it's still going, but that's fine. We got plenty of time. Okay. So one calculation I want to run is I have people need a hotel. They have a check-in date and a checkout date. Now, my conference is we're not small. We are a community conference, even though we're very large. And we will cover 2 nights of hotel unless you're an international speaker or a workshop speaker. But generally 2 nights of hotel. And so the metric that's actually interesting to me right now is when I'm booking a hotel, I need to know how many speakers are staying in a hotel longer than 2 nights. So I need to figure out, and my calculation is going to be, what's the difference in days between check-in and check-out? Okay. So that's what we're going to do. We'll kind of run through this. Now, the transformation piece is done with something called DataFlow. And what DataFlow is it's a layer cake, and the layer cake becomes important when you need to start troubleshooting things. So the layer cake is Apache Spark that sits on the bottom. So if you're familiar with any big data Hadoop kind of thing, Spark sits on the bottom and it does the calculations. It's the engine that does all the work. Then you got Databricks involved, and then you got DataFactory, and then DataFlow. It's this layer cake of technology goodness that gives you this cool UI that you can drag and drop stuff without having to write a whole bunch of horrible Python code to make Apache Spark work. So that's the idea. So what we're going to do now is we're going to build a data flow. We're going to create new data flow. We're going to create a mapping data flow. I know there's a wrangling data flow there, and this talk is wrangling data. but that's not what we're doing. Okay. So we are going to create a new data flow called session join. And basically how data flows work is I'm going to take the two data sources, the JSON data and the CSV data, and I'm going to put them together, run my calculation, and then be done. And it's going to be awesome, and you're going to be amazed. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a data source. And this data source, yep, lots of little helpful pop-ups because this is a new DataFactory instance. I'm going to say, hey, my new data source is Sessionized speakers. There you go. Now, notice I have no columns, and there's a reason for that. And if you're ever, oh, hey, look, my DataFlow debug session just now completed. So that's good. Now I can debug some stuff. And the reason why it has 0 columns is because when we built our session, our sessionized data, we didn't create a schema for it. And so if we come back up here to sessionized speakers, the data set, the JSON data set, and I say schema, hey, import that schema from the connection because now we've downloaded it. I now get a schema. And now I will get, yep. Oh, I know. I can't publish. Okay. We're importing data from sessions. That's the rest. That's the JSON. And we're also going to import data from the survey, the raw survey data. We're pulling from a data set, and we're going to pull the raw survey data from a CSV. And actually, same thing. If I go to survey raw, and I go to schema, I'm going to import the schema from the connection. There's my schema, right? Okay. So there's two things I want to do. The first thing I want to do is I want to say, hey, for everything that's in my source, my sessionized data, I want to go look up in the survey data and pull all that survey information in. Step one. Step two is I want to calculate the number of hotel nights that are involved for a given speaker. And then I want to save data to a curated zone of my data lake. So the first thing we're going to do here is we are going to add a lookup. This is going to give me heartburn. And so this lookup is basically, I'm going to say, I'm going to match full name with the name, which is so if you look at my data sets here in my Excel document, I've got a name. I've got an email address, which would be awesome. I've got, actually, those are the only two unique pieces of information. And my CSV, not my CSV, my JSON, I've got a full name, but I don't have an email address or a phone number or anything. So the only thing I can use to join these two things together is the name. So we're going to do that. And I am going to, this is giving me all kinds of horribleness. In my data preview, see, I've got data in my source, but I still have my 0 totals. Sessionized speakers. Clear that. I'm going to re-import my schema. Then I'm going to go back to my survey. Nope. My sessions.json. I'm going to drop this source because that's I'm going to add a new source. Session speakers. Ah, 12. Okay. So one of the things I will point out real quick. Right. Chad just popped in. No, this is exactly right. Right. There's so many different ways to track all this data, the speaker data, that it's nuts. And so one other important thing to note, I do not work for Microsoft and I do not report to the DataFactory team. And so when I say there's some idiosyncrasies about this tool that are not super awesome, I can say that because I'm a user of their stuff. I don't make it. And so there's some idiosyncrasies to it that are not awesome. And you just witnessed one of them, like it pulling the schema so I can do stuff with it. Okay. So now let's look up. In this lookup, I want to say, hey, I did not give anything names. And you'll notice that I usually have been very good about typing a name for everything. And the reason for that is because when it comes to these little drop downs, I want important things. So I'm going to say, hey, I want in the left side, I want the full name of the sessionized data to equal the name from my survey. And then when I go in here, now I can just say, hey, let's look at what this means. And it's going to actually give me now that joined data, just like that, all done. I've got the session data and the survey data mapped together. And while that's working, we're going to add one more thing. Oh, no, there it goes. Okay, so here's aid and test. This is the sessionized data, right? All this stuff. And then over here on the far side, look at now I've got the email address, his name, the phone number, the shirt size. I've merged those two things. So I have now merged REST API JSON data and an Excel document together across disparate systems all in one spot. And it took me like 5 minutes of actual real like work. But what I also want to do is calculate the hotel nights, right? I need to know how many nights the speaker is gonna be in a hotel. So I want to do a derived column. Now there's all kinds of stuff we can do. We did a lookup just now, which means, hey, source 3 is going to look up in source 2. We can join, we can union, you can aggregate, we can do all kinds of stuff. But I'm going to do a derived column, which basically means I'm going to come up with a new column called hotel nights. And what hotel nights is going to be, this is going to be weird, but go with it. I'm just going to subtract. If you look at my input schema, checkout date from check-in date. Oh, because I have to first convert it to a date. It doesn't know it's a date. And so all I have to do there is just say due date. Due date. I haven't finished that. Data preview. All right, let's refresh this. Let's see what I get now. So I've hooked the two things up. Now I just want the dates or how many hotel dates. Then I can add a new piece. I'll just kind of show you this one. Oh, wait, hold on. Before I go there, let's click off of that. Okay. Look over here at the end. How many hotel nights? This one has 5 nights. Let's do the math for ourselves. Checking in on the 16th, out on the 21st, 5 nights. 17th to 19th is 2 nights. 2 nights. So now I can sort by hotel nights, or I can just do an extract of everything that's more than 2 nights. So I can feed back to the speaker and say, hey, just so you know, we're not going to cover these extra, those types of things. I have this calculation now that's been done. And then I can filter that data with a select. I'll just show you this one because I don't want to go through them. I can filter the data with a select. That basically just minimizes the number of fields that are going to flow through. And then I'm going to drop it to a sink. And I'm going to drop it to my curated zone so that now I have data in my curated zone. I've got data in my raw zone. And then I take the curated zone and I stick it out into a database with another pipeline with a load. But I'm not going to walk through all the mechanics of that necessarily because it will bore you to death. Okay. Now, so we transformed the data. We added a hotel nights thing. We filtered down the data. Now I'm loading it into a central repository where I can run reports against it. And so kind of the flow for a normal project for us kind of sits like this. Now, we use DataFactory to load it into a SQL data warehouse where now you can plug Power BI into it or run some SSRS reports, all of those types of things. You can dump it into a Cosmos DB database that I could build a website against, which in specifically the case for KCDC or for Code PaLOUsa or some conference, that might be what you do, right? So you pull data from all these different sources, maybe get Twitter feeds and all this stuff, and you aggregate it all, you run it through these calculations, you drop it into a MongoDB database that now I've got my website running against. That would be the great idea. Okay. Let's take a breath for just a second and let's talk about the right way to do this because the tool's awesome. Like, I love the tool. I'm having loads of fun. I get to do complicated things that used to take me forever in code. Like, if I had to write code to do all this stuff, it would have taken forever. This way, it just happens. Let the tool do the work. But step number 1 is understand what you're trying to do. Right? The first thing we do with a client always is we walk in and say, okay, what are you trying to accomplish? Like, yes, you want to make decisions based upon data, but what type of decisions? What are the challenges you're trying to solve with your data? If the answer is, I don't know, I just want to look at the data and see what happens, well, that's a bit more of a challenge, right? We will dig and drive until we get to what the desired outcome is, so we know whether or not success has happened, right? What are the metrics that you're trying to fix based upon the data? Number 2, keep your data targeted. And I'll show you why. Okay, so I said we'll talk about what a data lake is, and this is my picture that perfectly resembles what a data lake should be. So, because ultimately, remember I said a data lake, it's just blob storage. I mean, ultimately, it's a little more complicated than that, but ultimately it's just blob storage, right? But we have the raw zone of our data lake, which is a perfect mirror. If you can see the mouse, a perfect mirror of the source data. Right? And then we have the curated zone, which is after I did all those calculations, I'm going to drop it in the curated zone. And then that curated zone goes to the database. And the curated zone perfectly mirrors the database. There's no difference between those things. And for us, it's a mentality, right? There's a reason why we do this, because if you start to change things, you start to pull in more data than you want, you start to manipulate that data and you throw stuff against the wall and you kind of see what fits. And then you do a whole bunch of transformations that don't get used and they don't get thrown into a database. And over time, your data lake becomes this. You don't know what it reflects. This shadow right here, it kind of looks like this tree, but not quite. And it's gross, and you don't know where anything is, and you don't know how to use anything, and it's it's not the right way to do things. Right. And so you want to avoid this mentality of a data swamp and keep that data lake crystal clear, so you understand what you're doing and how to use it, so you can get a better end result for the client or for your boss or for the business side or whoever you're doing this for. Right. Avoid your data swamp. Last but not least, keep it clean and documented. I showed you just a little bit of a hint when I didn't name my sources for my data flow, right? Source 1 or source 2 and source 3. I don't know what that meant, right? And actually, as I was building my demo a week or so ago, I kind of walked through this whole thing and I built it all out. And I looked over at the left side and it looked like this. The top two, great. Load sessionized data, load speaker data. I know what those two pipelines are doing. I have no idea what these data sets are. And then the data flow, I don't know what I'm trying to do with that. And so it becomes more complicated since we're building a whole bunch of reusable components. Like in the real world, I'm building pipelines that load data. And then another person that works on my team is using those data sets to go run calculations for the curated zone. And then somebody else is going to go do all the data warehouse loading. Well, if these data sets are not named in a way that makes sense, it makes everybody's job kind of miserable. And so you'll see we are very rigid about naming conventions and things like that to make sure that the end result doesn't look like this. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. I wanted to leave quite a bit of time for questions or for conversation or for thoughts, just to kind of see how everybody's doing or what questions you might have around this. So if you have some, awesome. If you don't have some, that's less awesome. But that's okay because we've only got about 5 minutes left. And so if you got a couple of questions, hit me with them. If you don't have questions, then you're free to hop off. That's totally cool. I can't see you leaving, so like there's no shame. So go ahead. And if you don't have any, because I was in Allison's talk earlier and she talks about silence being like super freaky and like one-on-ones. And it's totally true because it's very hard to sit here and quiet and then let somebody not type something. So, okay. So this session was recorded. If you have any questions, or you can hit me, Jonathan F. Mills. Jonathan F. Mills on Twitter, Jonathan F. Mills on Gmail, Jonathan F. Mills, pick a platform. I'm there somewhere with that username. So hit me up however you want to. Other than that, thank you guys for chilling with me. And then, yeah, I'll talk to you guys later. Oh, one thing I didn't say, and it's super important. I was sick yesterday, so I didn't like do some of the due diligence I needed to. Sponsors. I don't have the sponsor slide, but I will say out loud, the sponsors are awesome. It's one thing if you get to have a sponsor table and people like walk by, but to still sponsor a conference and not be able to like interact with the attendees, that's even huge. That's even a huger deal. So make sure you thank the sponsors in some way, ping them on Twitter or do something. Just say, hey, thanks for making Code PaLOusa possible. While we go through this, this new normal type situation. All right. Thanks, everybody.